To the extent the Prime Minister had a message he wanted to send to the American government, to President Obama, John Kerry, and others, what do you think the message was from this speech for that audience?
Well, I think the Israeli Prime Minister virtually threw down the gauntlet to the administration, saying, don't make this deal. As he said, the public aspects of which are known, go for a better deal. He basically had a very strong message that he didn't use these words, but he's saying the real crucial part of the deal is to allow Iran to have a uranium enrichment capability under international safeguards, under the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's the heart of it. The Iranians are never going to accept a deal in which they don't have a civilian nuclear enrichment capability, which is permitted by the NPT. He didn't mention that, but what he's saying is that he said that Iran will be able to produce many nuclear bombs if this deal goes through. So he's attacking the very substance of the deal. He's also attacking the very substance of the deal in terms of a reportedly 10-year deadline, saying that's a blink of an eye in historic terms, and then Iran can do whatever it wants. The third condition he put down, which is very significant, is don't lift sanctions based on what Iran does on the nuclear issue, but only what it does in its overall policies in the Middle East on terrorism and its relations with its neighbors, its relations with Israel. So basically, if you put this all together, what Bibi Netanyahu is signaling to the administration and to the Congress is that this is a bad deal, don't make it, go for much more stringent measures. My bottom line on this is that if Bibi's conditions are met, there'll be no nuclear agreement.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm curious if, just boiling that down, yesterday Susan Rice, President Obama's national security advisor, spoke at AIPAC, and she had a very concise quote where she said, we cannot let an unachievable ideal stand in the way of a good deal. Now, clearly, Prime Minister Netanyahu does not think this is a good deal, but I'm curious whether you think, on the basis of the things you were just saying, that what the Prime Minister wants is what Ms. Rice would call an unachievable ideal.
Well, I think she's right on that, because it's the old adage, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. If a viable, verifiable nuclear agreement can be reached between the United States and Iran and our allies, then that gives diplomacy a chance and the International Atomic Energy Safeguard System a chance to monitor Iran's nuclear capabilities and any outbreak toward a nuclear weapon. Now, that, in my eyes, is better than having no deal, but it has to be a good deal, because it puts Iran under international surveillance that is verifiable. And it gives diplomacy a chance to see if we can change Iran's behavior. Having said that, we do not, nor does Israel, have to dismantle any of the strong safeguards we have, our military might, our political influence, that if Iran does breach the agreement, that we could go back to increased sanctions, and in a worst-case scenario, all options are on the table.
Mr. Ambassador, where do you think the world is left, and Israel and the United States are left, if the negotiations end without an agreement? What happens at that point?
I think at that point what's going to happen is we're going to see a rush toward increased economic sanctions in the first instance against Iran. I think the relationship between Iran and the West and Israel will become much more problematic. I think we're going to see the same resort to negative policies on the part of Iran with no hope of our ability to change them in the region, be it terrorism, be it in Iraq, be it in Lebanon, be it in Syria, be it in Yemen. That's why it's important to try to get a viable, structured, sustainable agreement in place, because the alternative is more of the same in a very turbulent region of the Middle East now, where everywhere you look, perhaps without the exception of Tunisia, the region is in great turmoil.
Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you one last quick question before we go. There's obviously been a lot of discussion about what the long-term ramifications for the relationship between America and Israel are from this very controversial speech. Do you think that there's been significant and lasting damage done by the Prime Minister coming here and speaking in the context of the Israeli election?
Definitely there's been damage done. In my long experience in the Middle East and having been ambassador to Israel, this is the most muddled procedure I've ever seen of having a sitting chief of government, head of government, the Israeli Prime Minister, coming to address the United States Congress, going around the White House in doing so. Let's remember that the Constitution of the United States gives the President the primary responsibility for the conduct of foreign policy of the United States. Congress has a very important critical role, but it's the President. And to bypass the President in arranging this speech to Congress just 2 weeks before the Israeli elections, and this is a very important part of Bibi's coming to Washington, because he needs every single vote he can get in Israel to be reelected prime minister. So this has been one of the most muddled events I've seen in the bilateral relationship. It's not worthy of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. It remains very strong and very important. It's just been extremely badly handled.